Every word on a page carries layers of meaning, some hidden, some obvious. Today we will learn how modernist and postmodernist critics helped us uncover them. So hello everyone, I hope you are all doing great today. First of all, happy Dashera and Gandhi Jayanti to all of you, all the students. So this is going to be the final chapter of literary criticism. Literary criticism, this is going to be the final class. All the classes we have already watched, discussed everything, all the by with the ages, the major terms, highlights the critics writers have given us from their lenses, from their perspective, that how a writer, a critic should judge a work, and what points a writer should keep in mind while writing their work, whether it's poetry, drama, novel, or any other fiction or non-fiction work. Okay. So from T.S. Eliot's focus on lead structure and the objective correlative to Roland Barthes' idea of the death of the author, we will see how literature isn't just about what's written on the page, but also about the ideas, interpretations, and debate it sparks among all the English literature students who keep studying all these critic writers from the ages till now. So, with me, get ready to dive into a journey where words, ideas, and meaning constantly evolve and where every perspective counts. So, let's begin the class, everybody. First of all, thank you so much for joining. Do subscribe the channel, share to more and more students, and let me tell you, there are few important things that I'm going to post only for the members of the channel. So if any of you want to watch those content, you can simply join the or take the membership of the channel. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. Stay tuned. Do watch the class. This is going to be the final, and let's begin. Now tell me, before obviously going to the class, before starting the class, modernist critics, how many terms you remember that modernist critics have introduced in the way that we used to analyze literature, focusing on the form, structure, and the inner world of the writer. In the poetry class, I take you every time to the poetry section. Why? Because in the poetry section now, everything we have discussed in depth, especially the ages of English literature. So all the highlights of the ages, writers, their themes, their techniques, everything is mentioned. So after this class will over, the remaining class we will finish without taking much time, because now we have to only focus on the writers, their terms that they have given us, and if there is a drama, novel, we have to remember the characters, summary, and the important theories. Okay. So modern age critics, we all know the one name that stuck to our mind is T.S. Eliot, I.E. Richards, Ezra Pound, and many more. These are the specific writers, literary critic writers, who have given some of the important terms that always appear in the exam, and not just one, twice, thrice, but frequently. So also with the class, I'm running 5-year most important questions that each time, whether it's about the writer, whether it's about the concept, term, theories, NTA keep repeating. So do watch those video also. So modern age critics, after Victorian age, because just before Victorian, we have seen the Romantic age, just before we have seen the Neoclassical, and just before we have seen the Medieval, and just before we have seen the Classical age. All the critic writers. Some of the name that you should always keep in your mind that you can never forget. Because of their persona, because of their, you can say, what because of their theories, because of their influence that they have left on all of us. So modern age critics, how modern age started by rejecting the Victorian age perspective. So modernist criticism developed in parallel with the literature it evaluated, emphasizing radical breaks with tradition, formal experimentation, and search for new modes of meaning in a world shaken by industrializations and world wars. The First World War and the Second World War. The Second World War, we will see the influence in the postmodern age also, but started in the modern age. So these are the things that we must remember, and that became the major influence, the major impact of the modernist age critic writers. The modernist age, not only the critic writers, but all the writers of the modern age. Okay. It rejected Victorian moral earnestness and romantic idealism, focusing instead on the experimentation, fragmentation, psychology, and new critical methods. All these things, I told you, I keep suggesting you with the videos that try to grab the, not just mugging up the terms and theories and the writers, but try to grab the key ideas that related with one ages particularly. And by rejecting those terms, how we have entered in the next age, this thing, if you will relate from the earlier one to the upcoming, you will memorize everything for the longer period of time. You will remember everything for the longer period of time. Okay, so let's see the what are the characteristics of the modernist age and modernist critic writers specifically. So the modernist criticism started with the rejection of the Victorian past, what perspective they have going through. Modernist critic writers totally discarded them. Impersonality and objectivity, emphasis on tradition, formalism and close reading, elitism and the high-low culture divided. So all these things were rejected by the modernist writers. Okay, modernist writers, or you can simply understand modernist critic writers. Rejecting all these ideas of the past ages, they introduced a new way of analyzing literature. They were in search of the meaning aftermath of the World War First, industrialization going through the class system, industrialization, industrialization, and many things. And they started focusing on the what should be the form, how should be the structure of the inner world of the writer. So from classical, Renaissance, neoclassical, romantic, Victorian, modern, and till postmodern, you will see everything. You will experience. You will experience. So do not mug up. Do not just mug up. Do understand. Now let's see who are the major modernist critics. And the very, very important modernist critics writer we have here. T.S. Eliot, who was also an essayist, but he gained more popularity as a literary critic. Do you know this thing? We have seen a lot of work by T.S. Eliot, the work Murder in the Cathedral, The Cocktail Party, The Wasteland. Wasteland is an epic. How important the Wasteland work is. But he was also a great literary critic, and he was an Anglo-American. He was an Anglo-American. So T.S. Eliot was an American-born British poet, playwright, and literary critic. He gained more popularity by being a literary critic. Eliot was a central figure of the modernist movement. I have told you in the poetry class also. His criticism was highly influential and helped shape the critical taste of his generation, laid the foundation for modernist criticism. The major critical work that you will find, and all the literary terms theory that he has given us, Tradition and the Individual Toilet, 1919, Hamlet and His Problems, 1919, The Sacred Wood, it is a collection of essays on poetry and criticism, 1920, The Metaphysical Poets, 1921, The Function of Criticism, 1923. The metaphysical term metaphysical poets is coined by Dr. Samuel Johnson, but this term before Dr. Samuel Johnson is taken by the T.S. Eliot. Do you remember this thing? Metaphysical. Okay. So these are the important works. Now let's see in these works what he has given us. So in tradition and the individual talent, he proposes his theory of impersonality, in which work tradition and the individual talent, 1919, arguing that a poet should transcend their own personality and write within the larger context of literary traditions. Your personality should be, a reader should find your personality while reading a work. This should not be overshadowed by imitating the other writers. Imitating the other writers. He also developed the concept of objective correlative in the work Hamlet and His Problems. Again, it was in 1919. And in this work, how he has criticized Shakespeare and his character Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark, that this work lacks the objective correlation and it fails to portray the emotions to the audience. What is objective correlative? Do you know? Objective correlative, there should be a set of object, there should be a set of object or a set of chain that relates one thing to another. Similarly, while where he has criticized Hamlet and his problems, he also gave us the fine example of Macbeth in the sense of objective correlative. That was a success. That was a great success. So, in where a poet uses a set of objects, a situation, or a chain of events to evoke a specific emotion in the reader with by the character, that is what objective correlative defines means. Another, his formalist approach, emphasizing technique and tradition, was profoundly influential on new criticism. Criticism should be, according to T.S. Eliot, he said, criticism should be objective, impersonal, and detached. So, in the function of criticism, which was in 1923, he said criticism as commentary and elucidation, not creation. So, by saying this, that criticism as commentary and elucidation, not creation, elucidation, that means how you explain something to the reader. Okay, so this is what the elucidation stands for. In the work The Metaphysical Poets, 1921, he said the term dissociation of sensibility. These are all the terms that appear in the exam. Everybody, do not forget. Separation of thought and feeling after the 17th century. You know, dissociation of sensibility, what does it mean and how you can define this? T.S. Eliot described us this term in the work The Metaphysical Poets, 1921. He said that disruption of the unified experience of thought and feeling where intellect and passions are separated. It simply means there should be the separation of intellectual thought from emotional experience in poetry. Both should not be mixed. Both should be separated. So there is a dissociation, and remember the association is also related. You can relate this. Association when we join something, and dissociation when we separate something. So here he is talking about the separation of intellectual thought from the emotional experience in the work by the writer. There should not be any mix. Also, he contrasted with the earlier like unification of sensibility that we seen in the metaphysical poets. Unification of sensibility we can see in the poets, metaphysical poets. We have John Donne, George Herbert, Andrew Marvell, who could experience their thoughts and emotion as one. Like just I gave you the example of the writers. He also argued that poets like John Milton and John Dryden caused this split, leading later poets to favor either intellect or emotion over a unified experience of both. So association and dissociation, both are, you can relate like this to understand the meaning. So unification of sensibility and dissociation of sensibility. So unification of sensibility, this simply allow the reader to experience thought and emotion as a single in a cohesive manner. And dissociation of sensibility, you can simply understand that means there should be the separation between the intellectual and emotional responses that a reader should start while reading the work. So this means that later poets either thought or felt, but not both in a unified way. That means they should not be associated. Okay. So these are the dissociation of a sensibility. I hope you got the point. Now, the key quotation that you can remember, he said, poetry is not the expression of personality, but an escape from the personality. Okay, expression of personality, no, not the work is the poetry, but it is an escape from the personality. Now, let's go on to the next critic writer. We have Ezra Pound, who was also an American expatriate. Ezra Pound was an American expatriate poet and critic who championed many of the most innovative and controversial figures of the era. He was instrumental in defining early modernist poetic movements like imagism. What does he mean by imagism? Key works he gave us a retrospect 1918 and his famous dictum make it new. So in which sense he gave the concept make it new? These are the PYQs. Who coined the term imagism? It is none other than Ezra Pound. And who gave the concept make it new and what does it signify? So make it new is also by Ezra Pound, everybody. You can remember. So imagism stands for that, while reading the work you sometimes feel bored. Why? Because there are a lot of unnecessary things we find. So we think and we criticize the writer that why the writer has used so much unnecessary words vocab that is not required. So in this sense, imagism that there should not be superfluous of words and the word should be very precise, clear with the concrete images. He also emphasized in the imagism that the work should be emphasized clear and objective presentation. The language should be clear, sharp, and economical language. This term imagism by Ezra Pound and another key literary figure, Hilda Doolittle, appeared in 1912. So you can simply understand that it was the recreation against the sentimentality and ornamental language of late Victorian and Romantic age. So by mentioning imagism, he simply says that the work should be clear, the work should be precise, with the objective, with the object, there should no any unnecessary things that make the work feel low. So this was the concept by you can simply understand the work should not be any superfluous of words like you can simply this emphasis on economy leads to short, highly condensed poems. There should be an image. Pound defined an image as an intellectual and emotional complex in an instant of time. And the goal was to recreate the physical experience of an object through words, allowing the image itself to convey the emotional and the intellectual weight. For example, how a picture, there are no any words mentioned around the picture, but the picture itself defines a lot of things. The picture itself says many things. So if we observe those pictures with the different lenses, the people will find the different meaning. Intense. Somebody will find funny. Somebody will find any with the different lenses, we can create any meaning of the picture. So this is how he said the image should be. Precise, concrete image, emphasis, clear and objective presentation, clear, sharp and economical language should be mentioned. Now, another word, the make it new. Make it new, you can simply understand this term was a central concept in modernism and influenced many modernist writers. This was mentioned in his work 1934 collection of his essays, and it was became a mantra for modernist artists across various disciplines because this challenges them to break from outdated artistic traditions. What the earlier writers, classical writers, were following just before modernist age, you should discard all those styles, all those things, and now you should focus on innovation. Innovation, you should lead to experimentation. 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 Why? Because now you have entered into the modern age. So why people will like to read any tradition work that make them feel bored? So make it new. It's simply you can understand that the rejection of exhausted conventions, rejection of rejection of exhausted conventions, exhausted conventions, embracing innovation and experimentation, juxtaposition of the old and new, old, where I should go while writing, old and new, and borrowing across genres and cultures, genres and cultures. So this is what the meaning of make it new. It was like a legacy that continued to influence later artistic movements and the practice of building new creations from the repurposed elements. So these are the very important two terms given by Ezra Pound, and both are always appear in the exam. Here everything is mentioned in the PDF, and I will share on Telegram. You can read by yourself, and the thing that I am telling during the class, you can highlight or you can note it down in your notebooks. Now let's see the work. In the retrospect 1918, he formulated imagist principles while highlighting there should be the direct treatment of the thing, use no superfluous words, and compose in musical rhythm. That means avoiding all the unnecessary things, you should focus on them. So these are the highlights of the Ezra Pound. Okay. Now let's move to the next critic writer. Now another literary critic writer we have Virginia Woolf. Here it is mentioned, the name is up. Virginia Woolf, who was a prominent novelist and essayist and also a critic. She was most importantly, we can put her into the feminism term, feminism concept, because of the work that is majorly known, A Room of One's Own, and the novel Mrs. Dalloway we have. So she was also a critic. Woolf was a key member of Bloomsbury Group. How many members are there in this Bloomsbury Group? Do comment. Her criticism was more focused on the nature of writing itself and the literary imagination. She often come championing women writers and modern innovations. You know what was her perception? Emphasis on inner life, and there should be the independency for the woman, financial independency. This is what she has discussed in the work A Room of One's Own, which was published in 1929. There should be the financial independency of a woman so that they can write the work freely. There should be no restriction. There should be no patriarchy restriction on the women, on the women's writing. And also in this work, A Room of One's One, she has mentioned Judith Shakespeare, who supposed to be the fictional character. She used this character to illustrate how social conventions would have led to Judith's inevitable demise rather than the literary fame achieved by her brother, which is Shakespeare. So she has somehow tried to relate them by giving the example. This is also one of the questions of UGC NET exam, everybody. So the work that you have to remember: Modern Fiction 1919, Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Brown 1924, and A Room of One's on 1929. In chronologically, you can remember these works. In Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Brown, what she has discussed is she announced the break with Edwardian realism, arguing that modern literature must capture the complexities of consciousness rather than focusing on external details. Just told you now, she was more focused on the inner life. She was more focused on the inner life. Okay. A Room of One's on, which is a seminal feminist text, arguing in this work she has argued for the material conditions, specifically a private space and a financial independency for the women, that women need to produce great art, okay. Modern Fiction in 1919, she advocated the term stream of consciousness and new narrative techniques, and she also criticized Edwardians, Bennett, Galsworthy, and Wells. Okay. The famous quotation you can remember by her: a woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. So this line appears in the work 1929, A Room of One's Own. Okay, everybody, now let's move to the next one. Now, in the same age, we will find some associated moments, which is also very, very important, and schools. So the first one, we have new criticism, which was also popular. Remember the modernist age time period, we have 1900 to mid 20th century, or you can simply write 1945, and then after 1945 we will enter into the postmodern age. And so 1945 to not, you can just have to mention the any particular year, but the present time you can mention, because we are all part of the postmodernist age. So, in New Criticism, it was a dominant in Anglo-American literary studies from the 1930s to 1960s. New Criticism, it derives its methodology from modernist principles. And the key figures of New Criticism, you can find I.A. Richards, Clint Brooks, and William Emerson. And what are the terms, concepts they have given us? We will discuss them later. Key ideas of New Criticism was, remember, New Criticism was, they emphasized the close reading of the text, analyzing their structure, imagery, and language in isolation from historical context or authorial intention. Authorial intention in the sense that the work should not be judged by the reader on the basis by knowing the authorial background, historical context of the work or the writers, but there is a work text, you should have to focus on the text only and find the meaning. And related to this new criticism, how many concepts we will see later. So they also introduced the concept of the heresy of paraphrases in new criticism, and in the postmodern age we will see this, which claims that the poem's meaning is inseparable from its form and cannot be accurately summarized in prose. They also coined the influential terms like ambiguity, tension, and irony to describe the complex, often contradictory, the layers of meaning within the text. Okay, so this was the key idea of the new criticism. Next, formalism. Formalism, which was combinedly Russian and Anglo-American. Like new criticism, formalism focused on the text's formal properties. Russian formalists in the 1910s and 20s developed a scientific approach to analyzing literary language. And the key figures we can find: the Victor Shklovsky, Roman Jakobson, and Boris Ishemberg. Remember the term defamiliarization, which is the very important. Defamiliarization. My screen is getting smaller day by day. Defamiliarization. Their idea was emphasis on the concept of defamiliarization, the literary technique of making familiar objects seem strange in order to renew the reader's perception. And also they shifted the focus of criticism away from the biographical or social reading towards the internal working of the literary text itself. So remember, the Russian formalism, which was aroused during the 20th century, 1950 to 30s, while new criticism, United States and in Britain, which was also aroused in 1940s to 50s. So the major things we will study in the postmodern age, but we have started, so we have to go through. Russian formalism, they focused on the form, structure, structure of the literariness, like the text by examining the formal device that differentiate the literary language from ordinary practical language. While new criticism, you can understand, they shared they thought that there should be the interplay between form and meaning. It treats the text as an organic whole. How? Because all the elements of form contribute to a unified complex meaning. Okay. Key concept of Russian formalism by Viktor Slosky, defamiliarization, which is also known as Austrian name, and in new criticism you will find organic unity. Who gave this term? Organic unity. Who talked about organic unity? Everybody in the Romantic age we have seen S.T. Coleridge. Organic unity in the sense the idea that a work of literature achieve a single integrated meaning by reconciling different elements like paradox, irony, and tension. The approach of Russian formalism was they views literary language as a deviation or deformation that was of a standard language. And in new criticism, you can understand this. They views literary language as a specialized discourse that differs qualitatively from scientific or philosophical language. So these were the difference between the Russian formalism and new criticism. The key figures of Russian formalism, you can remember Viktor Shlotsky, Roman Jakobson, Boris Ishambam, and Yuri Tynion. While in the new criticism, we can find John Crow Ransom, I.A. Richards, Clint Brooks, Robert Penn Warren, and William Emerson, along with the minor critic writers. Okay, these are the major ones. Now let's move on to the next. Now the writer is important, but because of some literary, because of few criticism, we have included them, because who knows what NT is going to ask, like June 2025, what they have done. So D.H. Lawrence, which we can include him in a modernist age, who was born on 1885, England, who was a novelist, poet, essayist, and a critic writer. So what was the significance highlights given by him? Lawrence's criticism blends psychology, morality, and instinct, setting him apart from the formalist and the romantic critics. He was the contemporary with Eliot, Pound, and Virginia Woolf, but he focused on vitality, instincts, and the psychological realism. Criticism bridges literary, moral, and psychological dimensions according to D.H. Lawrence. And the work that you have to read, Studies in Classic American Literature, 1923. In this work, he has talked about the psychological and moral analysis of American writers like Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville, and the detective novel, oh, I always forget his name, Whitman, Walt Whitman. He emphasized blood consciousness. Do remember, everybody? Blood consciousness, instinct, and vitality over purely intellectual and analysis. And the approach of D.H. Lawrence was to interpret literature as a life force, emotion, and psychological depth. Another work, Pornography and Obscenity, 1929, it was an essay. In this work, he defends of sexuality, of human instincts in literature, and critiques societal repression and puritanical standards. The Symbolic Meaning, 1913, which was also an essay, he focuses on symbolism in literature, revealing psychological and spiritual truth. Okay. In the Reflection of the Death of a Porcupine, 1920s, which was also an essay, these are the works that you must remember. He talked about the moral and symbolic interpretations of events in life and literature. And the key concept by D.H. Lawrence, blood on unconsciousness versus mental unconsciousness, important, everybody. Blood consciousness, there should be included instinct, emotion, and natural life force. They are not talking about any blood, okay? But this is the thing that you can include in the concept. Mental consciousness define rationality, intellect, and artificiality. Lawrence favored blood consciousness as the basis for literature, which includes instinct, emotions, natural, and life force. Blood consciousness, instinct, emotions, natural, life force. Okay. So I hope you're getting the point of all these literary writers, critic writers. Also, he talked about vitalism, which means art and criticism must affirm life, energy, and instinct. So vitality stands this. Focused on the work itself, not the author's biography. So you can relate this with the new criticism. Moral criticism, he said, literature's value reflection of life, morality, and human instinct. And the key quotation: life is the measure of literature, and never trust the teller, trust the tale. These two quotes are extremely important, everybody, for the UGC net exam. Now let's move to the next one. Now let's move to the next one. Gertrude Stein, also very important. 1874 to 1946, a central figure in the Parisian modernist literary and artistic circles, hosting the famous Stein Salon, who was a writer, poet, and essayist, and also a critic. She was known. She was known for experimental prose and avant-garde literary theories. This is very important. She studied literature and art in Paris and Harvard. She was the contemporary of Pound, Eliot, Virginia Woolf, and D.H. Lawrence. And the criticism that she has focused on language, form, perception rather than conventional moral of or historical evaluation. Okay. So the minor one I have also included so that we should not miss any. Major critical works by Gertrude Stein, Composition as Explanation, 1926. She explains her experimental approach to writing and language. She introduces her method of repetition, rhythm, and continuous present tense. She emphasizes that meaning arises from linguistic patterns rather than narrative or content. The structure, the syntax form she is talking here. Narrative, we use the grammatical method to create the narration part. It is just a narrative. Okay, so that is why she has mentioned here that meaning arises from the linguistic patterns, how we construct the semiotics, phonemes. Then the Lectures in America 1935. Lectures in America 1935. It was a collection of lectures on modernist literature and art. In this work, she explored language as a structure, rhythm, and abstraction. She also discussed how modernist writers break traditional syntax to create new literary forms. And in Tender Buttons, 1914, which was a prose poetry, she discussed through a literary work also a critical experiment in language, and also she demonstrates how words can create meaning independent of a conventional grammar or narrative logic. Okay, the key concept and the term by Gertrude Stein we can remember here: experimental language. In this, she has talked about words are materials, syntax, repetition, and rhythm creates meaning. Continuous present. In this, writing in a tense that emphasizes immediacy and ongoing perception. So, for the linguistic, to solve the linguistic questions, we can remember this. Language as form, meaning derives from structure, sound, and visual pattern, not just a content. And the one thing important, avant-garde criticism, this is the important, I already appeared in the exam. She critiques conventional literary standards, encourages reader engagement with text as a living process. Okay, so these are the highlights. Now, another critic writer, Edward Wilson, who was an essayist, critic, editor, and literary historian. He focused on literature, history, and culture, blending critical insight with political awareness. So we can find in the work of Edmund Wilson or in his criticism or in his perception through his lens, blend of critical insight with the political aspects. He was called a critic's critic. Who? Edmund Wilson. Critic's critic, very, very important. For deep scholarship and broad cultural perspective, he was a contemporary of Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, D.S. Lawrence, and Virginia Woolf. And according to him, criticism is a cultural, historical, and literary rather than purely formalist. Major work by him, Axel's Castle. In this, he study of symbolism and early modernist literature. He discusses writers like Yeats, Joyce, Eliot, Prowse, and Valery. He explores psychology, mysticism, and symbolism in modern literature. Edmund William. My cat is now disturbing me. Shut up. In the another work to the Finland Station, which was in 1940 published, Literary and Political History of Socialism, he talked about it. He also explains the relationship between literature and the socio-political ideas, and he also bridges the history, politics, and the literature. Another work, The Triple Thinkers, which was an essay, 1920s. He critiques modern writers, emphasizing intellectual rigor and clarity. The key concept by him, you can remember everybody, cultural criticism, which reflects social, historical, and political conditions in literature. He talked about symbolism and modernism. In this, you find the literature that literature contains hidden symbolic meaning tied to psychological and cultural currents. Interdisciplinary approach, according to him, that this approach combines literary analysis with history, politics, and philosophy, and another modernist literature appreciation. According to him, it advocates studying writers in the context of their literary movements and intellectual environment. And here are the key quotations that you can remember for the work. A critic is a man who knows the rules, and the rules are what he makes them. The mind of the critic should be open to both literature and life. Who said this? Edmund Williams. Okay, now let's move to the next. The another most important literary critic, we have F.R. Lewis, who was associated with the Cambridge University for most of his careers. He was an English critic, influential teacher at Cambridge, was the founder of the journal Scrutiny, 1932 to 1953. He advocated literary criticism as a moral and a social force. Remember, he was famous for setting the canon of English novelists and poets. Remember, his critical practices was rooted in a distinct, that was a set of beliefs about the purpose and the value of literature. So, very, very important. You know, he profoundly impacted the study of English literature, championing a specific set of authors, ideas, while you can say that he fiercely criticizing those he deemed unworthy. In the sense, the writers he find unworthy, there is something lacking in the work of the writers. He criticizes fiercely in more aggressive manner, angry group, you can say, fiercely by getting angry, not the normal anger, but the fierce manner. He talked about the moral function of literature. He talked about the importance of close reading. He talked about the emphasis on the concrete over the abstract. And he also defined the great tradition. So that is why F.R. Lewis is very important. We must not forget to study about him as a separate. Major works you can remember: New Bearings in English Poetry, 1932, Revaluation in 1936, and The Great Tradition, 1948. So Great Tradition, the T.S. Eliot name will definitely appear. Another work, Education and the University, 1943. So revaluation, in this he talked about the reassessment of English poets, especially the metaphysical poets, which we have John Donne, Andrew Marvell, George Herbert, along with the minor. The great editions in this work he has talked about the canonical English novelist. And who was the canonical English novelist? Remember, Jane Austen, George Eliot, Henry James, and Joseph Conrad. He also gave the concept of moral seriousness in literature, and he advocated close reading as a foundation for literary judgment. Followed I.A. Richards, but insisted he was following the close reading, which was founded by I.A. Richards and new criticism writers, but he also insisted on historical moral evaluation too, that you not should only focus, but you should also evaluate the historical part and what was the moral part of the writers. He criticized mass civilization and minority culture. So mass civilization, we can say that he was concerned for the preservation of an authentic culture against what he deemed mass civilization. Okay. He also gave the concept of two culture. So two culture controversy, it was actually one of his most famous intellectual battles was with the C.P. Snow over the two culture thesis. Two culture thesis. In this, he passionately attacked Snow's suggestion that scientific and literary culture were separate and equally valid. He arguing for the cultural centrality and moral supremacy of the humanities. So there was a brawl between these two writers. Okay. Then in the literary journal scrutiny, what he has discussed, Lewis edited the influential literary journal scrutiny with his wife. The name was Queenie Dorothy Lewis, and this journal served as a powerful platform. Scrutiny, powerful journal, powerful platform for their critical principles, shaping literary education and public debate for decades. Okay. So in the Great Tradition, he heavily influenced by T.S. Eliot, praising him and other modernist writers like Ezra Pound, and G.M. Hopkins for their intellectual and technical vigor over the perceived sentimentality of Victorian poetry. So this was the perception of F.R. Lewis. Okay. Key quotations you must remember: the function of criticism is the elucidation. The art of explaining the work is known as the elucidation. Okay. Now let's move to the next one. Another most important literary critic writer we have, I.A. Richards, that we were talking about in New Criticism. Ivor Armstrong Richards was a British literary critic and rhetorician whose work you can simply understand in New Criticism was the academic study of English literature for the other critics, other writers, and for the student. Why? Because Richards uses insights from the psychology and semantics to analyze how language do keep note. I hope you're all noting the point, everybody. Language works and how readers experience poetry. How readers experience poetry. His emphasis on close reading was a radical shift that influenced generations of critics, including F.R. Lewis and William Emerson. Okay. Remember everything. The work is which is very important. He gave practical criticism, principle of literary criticism, and he focused on the close reading of the text. He was an English literary critic. We have done. He was known as the father of practical criticism, and he was the pioneer of applying psychology plus science in criticism. Very, very important. The major works you must not forget: The Meaning of Meaning, 1923, which was written with C.K. Ogden. This is the PYQ, everybody. I'm highlighting. Principles of Literary Criticism 1924, Science and Poetry 1926, Practical Criticism 1929, and The Philosophy of Rhetoric 1936. Always from this work you will find the questions in the exam. And the key ideas that he gave us in practical criticism, he gave the students unseen poems. In this work, he gave some unseen poems, unseen works to the students of the Cambridge, and he asked them to submit your response within a week by having a close reading without providing them any external or any author's background, historical background, writers, authors, any external material. Just he asked them to focus on the text and define the meaning, how you interpret the meaning. He found that readers misinterpret due to stock responses and mnemonic irrelevance. Stock responses, overused automatic reactions that weaken true literary experience, mechanical, unthinking reaction to literature. Stock responses, there are students who are creating anything. It means, in a simple sense, the text is saying something else. That means defining, giving the meaning something else, and you have analyzed the different meaning. So that is the stock response. Mnemonics, wrong association or irrelevant connection in interpretations. So this was the method of close reading using the unseen text by I.A. Richards. Okay, this work is very, very important, and the simple one concept that you have to understand. I.A. Richard gave a few works which was not highlighting any extra materials in the sense historical background of the authors, writers, name, even the name of the writers also. Why? Because while if we know the name, we will find out that what is the perspective of this writer. So with that perception, the writer has written the work, so we will able to find out the meaning, or if we are not able to find, but we will be able to reach to the closest of the meaning. So that is why there was nothing, only the unseen poems. Like we solve the passages comprehensions, we do not have anything, just the text we have been provided, and we have to solve the questions. Similarly, this was the practical with the Cambridge students. In this work, in the work, The Philosophy of Rhetoric, you will find the four kinds of meaning, which is very important. Sense, which is your literary meaning, what should be the sense of the work. Feeling, what is the feeling of the worker, feeling of the writer actually that he has put in the work. Tone, by which tone the writer is writing the work. It is the relation of the writer to audience, attitude towards listener or a reader, and intention, the writer's aim, purpose of the speaker. So here I have given you the mnemonic. You can understand SFTI, safety. The four meaning: S for sense, S for sense, F for feeling, T for you can understand tone, okay, and I for intention. I for intention, okay. Do not forget, okay. Then another thing, in the work science, in this work, the work we have is science and poetry. Science and poetry, he has talked about the science, that is the statement or fact, which is, remember, inductive and deductive method. Science, which is generalized. So in the science and poetic, he talked about the science that is a statement of fact, the fact which is used in the science experiment, and poetry, vehicle of emotive truth. This is also a PYQ. They asked that in the science of and poetry, what is the meaning of poetry given by I.A. Richard? Everybody, I'm giving you the questions. I remember. My memory is sharp actually. I do not forget my students. I do not forget the questions. If there are so many, but there are if the important question that will stuck to my mind, I will not forget them. Key quotation: a poem is a machine to think with. A poem is a machine to think with. And pseudo statement must remember poetic language, not factual, but carrying emotive force. Very, very important. Okay. So this is the thing you have to remember about I.A. Richard, that in his book 1929, Practical Criticism, he has documented an experiment he conducted with Cambridge students. He gave them a series of anonymous poems without authors, dates, titles, and asked for their written response, that how you are going to interpret the text, how you are going to find the meaning. So in this work, while finding the work, I.A. Richard find the stock response, which was misinterpretation by the readers, by the students. And that is why he gave us idea of the close reading of the text. Then he uses two uses of language in science and poetry. He talked about the science versus poetry, statement of fact and vehicles of emotive truth. Then in the scientific or referentative language, he talked about the emotive language. Emotive language, this is the language of poetry and art designed to evoke feelings, attitudes, and emotional response in the sense of truth. Truth of a poetic statement that is not factual but a psychological. Okay. Then he gave us the four kind of meaning, which is a safety, sense, feeling, tone, and intention. Sense, in the sense, what is the referential meaning of the words, what is the attitude and emotions of the writers towards the reader, towards the work and topic that he is writing. Then tone, in the sense the speaker's attitude towards the audience, and the intention, the conscious or unconscious effect the writer hopes to produce in the reader. So this is the four kinds of meaning. Okay, now let's move on to the next. Now another literary critic we have, Clint Brooks of New Criticism, who was the leader of New Criticism and the student of I.A. Richards. Again, very important, remember. He was an American critic, central figure in the New Criticism part, and he was, along with John Crow Ransom, and Alan Tate, he developed new critical practice in the US. The major work you can remember by him, Understanding Poetry, 1938, with Robert Penn Warren. The well-wrought on, very, very important work this is. Studies in the Structure of Poetry, 1947, and the Modern Poetry and the Tradition, 1939. He was one of the most influential American literary critics of the 20th century of the New Criticism. Everybody, do not forget. New Criticism movement led by him. His work revolutionized the teaching of literature by emphasizing the close reading and a focus on the text itself rather than on the author's biography, historical context, title, or any other extra materials. Okay. So in the new criticism, if you're studying about the one thing, close reading text. Central ideas he gave us. So the key concept ideas given by him, Clint Brooks, was first and very important. One second. Heresy of paraphrase. In the work, you will find this in the well wrought on in 1947. Subtitle, Studies in the Structure of Poetry. In this work, now what he has discussed, what he has talked about, actually he argued against the heresy of paraphrase. This was a term for the mistaken belief that the meaning of a poem could be adequately summarized or restated in a prose. In sense, he believed a poem's form and content are unified in an organic whole. Okay, so this was he was talking. He said that meaning of a poem cannot be reduced to paraphrase, and poetry's meaning is inseparable from its form, structure, and the imagery. Okay, you cannot separate the meaning of a poetry from its what is the form, structure, and the image, rhyme, meter, what that is actually used in the work. Then another concept, paradox in poetry, which was a central to poetic language, unifying the opposites. Unifying opposites in the sense it was not just a literary device but the very mechanism of poetic expression. He argued that even seemingly simple poets like Wordsworth employed paradox. He gave example, Wordsworth, Wordsworth and said He employed the paradox at a structural level. And he also talked about irony. He viewed irony as a fundamental principle of structure in the sense that it is the way a poem's context and competing elements qualify and modify. Irony, he talked about paradox and irony. It is also by Clint Brooks here in the exam. Irony, he said that it is the way of poem's context and competing elements to qualify and modify one another to create complex, multifaceted meaning. Okay, multifaceted meaning in the work. Then another concept he talked about, organic unity, he supported and said all elements of a poem, whether it's a form, content, imagery, rhythm, form a unified whole. Then close reading, we have talked about already, the careful analysis of a text itself. There should not be biography, history, title, etc. thing. He emphasized on ambiguity, irony, and tension in literature. Then criticism of romanticism, he said he attacked the idea that poetry is more expression of emotions, that you should not only focus on the emotion, you cannot bound the readers by focusing or mentioning the emotion part only, but it is beyond that. Okay, it is beyond the emotions. The key quotations by Clint Brooks, the poem, if it be a true poem, is a well wrought on. And the heresy of paraphrase is the notion that a poem can be reduced to a prose statement. That is why the literary criticism part is very, very important and the most scoring topic for the English literature students for UGC NET exam. Because in this we can see now how many terms, theories, concept highlight significance by one single writer, and in one work we have to remember. Move on to the next. Now, after modernist age, what you have found, everybody, that it was the shift and it was the shift from the Victorian age, their concept, their terms, to the modern age. The people of modern age were now in search for meaning because of the chaotic life of World War and industrialization. And in the same manner, critics have criticized the work by giving their own terms and concept. So, what is postmodernist critics and so what is the postmodern age? You know, now post means after, and modernist age we have already seen, we have already watched, understand what are the key concepts of the modern age. So, you can simply understand that this way age was also a reaction against the modern thinking of the writer. They totally discarded what they totally not just discarded, they rejected what the modernist age writers were following. So after the modernist period, criticism became dominated by diverse theoretical movements which largely rejected the modernist ideals of universal meaning and aesthetic objectivity. The modernist age writers critics were majorly focusing on the meaning, universal truth. All these things were rejected by the postmodernist critics and the writers. And they are now focusing on what is the current situation of life, what is the current opinion of the people, instead of blending the traditions and the modern age or searching for the meaning in life. You should focus now. So it was also the aftermath effect of the post World War II and the Cold War. World War II and Cold War. So postmodernism, post-structuralism, and various forms of contextual criticism became prominent in postmodern age. They were challenging the established notions of the authorship, meaning, and the literary canon that were popular in the modern age. This age was characterized by the rejection of grand narratives. Remember, everybody, very, very important line. Focus on language, structure, and reader centered criticism. All these things were discarded by the modern, postmodern age critics. Here, in the simple way, I have tried to explain you because many of the, especially the beginners, find it difficult to understand that what is the modern age and what is the postmodern age. So, post means always remember it is after what we have experienced earlier. So, postmodern is a way of thinking in literature or art and philosophy that says there is no single truth or fixed meaning, which was believed in the modern age and the by the modernist writers, but everyone can have their own truth. It's simply you can understand if something is happening to me, you cannot understand, you cannot feel that this same thing will happen to you. So if you are believing the same thing will happen to you, that means you are believing in the single truth and the meaning is fixed. But my life is my life, and whatever is happening to me is not going to happen to you. So that is your life, and that is your the way of thinking and perception. So this is what the major thing you will find in the postmodern age, that is no absolute truth, but everyone can have their own truth. This postmodern age idea challenges the idea that there is one correct answer, one grand story, or one universal rule, which was this is the concept of modern age. Okay. Instead, postmodern believes in many perspectives, multiple meanings, playfulness, and freedom. Very, very important. You can take a screenshot or you can prepare your own notes. There's not only fixed meaning, which was in modern age, but there are multiple meanings. Just I gave you the example by comparing my life and your life. So the situation, the scenario can be different basis on their different perspective. Okay. And we are living in a society, so everybody has their own point of view and their own opinion to share and to live with. Somebody has been educated who has different personality now, who has different thinking, different opinion about a rural area, about a girl's education. And in the similar manner, the people who are not educated or who have the orthodox thinking, who have believed, who believed that the girl should not be educated. So in this age now, we are finding the multiple meanings, or you can say the multiple opinions. So this is the postmodern age. You can subscribe the channel in between. Now, while recording the classes, I'm not reminding you because I somewhere lost while explaining the content, and I forgot to remind you to subscribe the channel, to share to more and more students, because a student distract. So that is why I have stopped saying this. See, if students are liking the content, they will definitely subscribe. So I do not have to remind, and also who will like the content, who will definitely join the channel by taking the membership badge. Example I have given you here, I have added so many things in this PDF and different way to make you understand what is the difference between modernist age and the postmodernist age. And if you once understand this concept, this modernist thing theory, you will understand everything. Then after this, you are not going to have any issue. So we can have the example in the modernism, a novel tries to find deep meaning in life. For example, T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, which was published in Wasteland, which was published in 1922. Okay, so deep meaning. And here the given example, James Joyce Ulysses. And in the postmodernism, a novel may say life itself has no fixed meaning. Let's play with the stories and let the reader decide. So like Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow, in the book you can find the example, and also Waiting for Godot is the great example of postmodernism. Let me write in short. Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett, 1953, is the great example. Why? Because in this work, what was the significance? You find absurdity by the character of the work, absurdity, existentialism, Existentialism, everybody, right? So postmodernism discard that there is no absolute truth, only different perspective and interpretations. They are there. Here is the great example, modern age versus postmodern age in every sense. So historical context, postmodern age was shaped by World War First and Second, industrialization, disillusionment, quest for meaning, fragmentation, everything we have find, search for meaning. While postmodernism was shaped by Cold War, sense of absurdity, existentialism, disconnection, disillusionment, and disorder. This thing you find in this postmodern age, globalization, consumerism, technology, and digital revolution. Did you find the keyword this difference in the postmodern and modern age, everybody? Then, in the philosophical sense, we can differentiate both. Post-modern age was influenced by rationalism, humanism, existentialism. That means search for truth and meaning. Whereas postmodernism, which was influenced by relativism, skepticism, deconstruction, that is, truth is unstable and it has a multiple meanings. Okay. In the literary style, we can understand modernist age experimented with form, structure, and the like we just seen Virginia Woolf, a stream of consciousness and fragmented narratives. While in the postmodernism age, will find playfulness, parody, pastiche, metafiction, and intertextuality. These are the keywords. Remember everything. In the language view, modern age, language was supposed to be a tool to represent inner reality and external world. Whereas in postmodern age, language as a game, supposed to be a game, reality is constructed by language itself. In the critical sense, criticism, we have New criticism, I.A. Richards, Clint Brooks, formalism, psychoanalytic criticism, and structuralism beginnings. And in the post-structural, we will find Derrida, deconstruction, reader response, then Stanley Fish, feminist, post-colonial, and cultural criticism. And the writers of postmodern and modern age, in the modern age, T.S. Eliot, Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, Ezra Pound, I.A. Richard, F.R. Lewis, Clint Brooks. In postmodern age, we find Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, Roland Barthes, Jean-Francois Lyotard, Linda Hutcheon, and Homi Bhabha. Remember now, it is the very easy way to make you understand key terms and concept. In the modern age, we found and we saw tradition and the individual talent, objective and correlative, stream of consciousness, organic unity. And in the postmodern, you will find death of the author, deconstruction, discourse and power, and meta narratives. Understand now? Now, view of reality. So, modern age writers were believe in hidden order structure behind chaos, and they were in search for meaning. Whereas in postmodernism, the writers believe in pluralism, fragmentation, irony, and no single truth, and reality is relative. So, what is the conclusion of the postmodern and modernism? So, modernism was the quest for the stability in chaotic situations. They wanted to stable in life by finding the meaning. Art as serious and purposeful, according to them, they should be. So, modernism seeks meaning, order, and structure, while in postmodern age we find postmodernism, the writers embraces chaos. They were not in search for meaning, but they embrace what was the situation of the postmodern age. They celebrate play. They were uncertain. They talked about hybridity. So, in other sense, postmodernism questions meaning itself, celebrating plurality, irony, and fragmentations. How do you like this session, everybody? Do let me know in the comment section. I took so much time to prepare this. That is why I was not uploading the class. This is going to be the last class. Do remember, do not miss. So this was the difference between modern age and postmodern age, okay? With the concept, key terms, language, view of the writers, everything is mentioned in the PDF. And also not only that, but I have also in the very short way included this image, the chart. You can simply understand this. I was separating them but could not. So I have pasted this. Now let's move on to the writers. And also, everybody, if you find difficult to understand the absolute truth, what is absolute truth? So absolute truth means a truth that is universal, unchanging, and objective. The truth that cannot be changed. In the sense, we can understand that the Suraj rises from the east and it sets in the west. So this is the truth you cannot change. So there was something happening in the people's life. So people thought that this is an absolute truth. And the writers were also focusing on the absolute truth. So this was the how this happened in the modern age. Okay, it universal in the sense the same for everyone and everywhere, does not depend on time and culture and situation. But you know one thing, how you can understand post-modern age, we are living in the 21st century, and there are the variety of music, there are the variety of culture we find these days, right? So everybody is now adopting all these things. So why everybody is going to focus on the modernist age writers by sitting at one place and watching the people that if they will do something, then we will do. So that is the fix. You are waiting for somebody, that somebody will wake you up to change your mind, to do something new for your own self. But in the in while on the other hand, in the postmodern age, people are following the culture. They are not stable. They are following what they like, the pop music, the jazz music. They listen to whatever they want. They are following whatever they want. They are the influencers, the writers, the critics, the cultural part, or the situation. They are not depending on time. That time will come and tell them that this is the thing that you should do now. But they are now more predictable. They are creating and they are creating their own meaning. They are creating their life by adding the meaning. Okay, I hope you have understand this concept very well. I have also differentiated between the absolute truth versus relative truth. Absolute truth was in the modern age prevailed, and relative truth we can find in the postmodern. Okay, move on to the next. Now let's discuss about the postmodern critic writers. And when we have Roland Barthes, where are you going? Roland Barthes was a French literary theorist, philosopher, and semiotician who create meaning everybody, who talked about or discussed about, who played a pivotal role in structuralist and post-structuralist thought, analyzing literature, culture, and media through the lens of science and symbols. Through the lens of science and symbols, who Roland Barthes. Major works you can find: Writing Degree Zero, 1953. In this work, he has discussed about the literature as a system, critics of tradition forms, mythologies. You know, all the modernist age writers and the post-modernist age writers. I have highlighted everything, but still, we need a detailed class on each topic. That we should not miss any minor thing, any small bit. So do not just mug up. Mug up is not in should be happen in my class. Everything is mentioned here. Do read, do understand, and create your own meaning. Okay, there should not be any limitation to your thinking. Everybody, you can have your own opinion. Mythologies, 1957. Semiotic analysis of culture. He talked about myth as cultural meaning. In the work The Death of the Author, 1967, according to him, meaning comes from the reader, not the author. While once the writer has finished the work, the writer get aside. Now it's reader who creates the meaning by interpreting the text. So as said 1917, he talked about multi-dimensional analysis of Balzac. That means multiple interpretations of the work. Introduced the concept of death of the author. He emphasized the text are spaces of interpretations and developed semiotic analysis of everyday cultural science. Okay, now let's move to the next. Another critic writer we have Jacques Derrida, who was a French philosopher and the founder of deconstruction. He critiqued fixed meanings. The fixed meanings which was popular in modern age, he criticized them, and he said that there is no fixed meaning, but by the time and with the form, with the context, meaning keep changes. He talked about hierarchical oppositions and binary structures in text. arguing that language is inherently unstable. The major works we must remember about him of grammatology, 1967, he introduced deconstruction. Meaning is always deferred. That means difference. There is the difference of in the meaning. Writing and difference, 1967. Again, essay on language, literature, and philosophy. He talked about the margins of philosophy, 1976. He talked about constructive readings of Western philosophy. And the concept he gave to us, he developed the deconstruction as a method for reading text. He also exposed contradictions in binary oppositions, that means speech, writing, and the presence absence. He also argued that meaning is relational and unstable. Okay. Now, another writer we have, everybody, critic writer, Michel Foucault, was also a French philosopher, historian, and social theorist. He explored the relationship between power and knowledge, very, very important, and discourse, power, knowledge, and discourse, showing how institutions shape perception and meaning. The major work, the Archaeology of Knowledge, 1969. You can cross check the year, everybody. My methodology for analyzing discourse he has given in this work. And another work, Discipline and Punish, 1975. In this, he has talked about the relationship of power and institutional control. And the history of sexuality, he talked about the social construction of ideas through discourse. And the concept he gave, he introduced the discourse analysis in literature and society. He studied how power shapes knowledge. And he also developed the author function, showing authorship is socially constructed. Okay. Another critic writer we have, everybody. Do not miss the class. This is the last class of the literary criticism. So do not miss, do share, make all the students to watch the video. Northrop Frye we have, who was a Canadian literary critic who focused on archetypal criticism. He analyzed recurring patterns, myth, and structures in literature. And the major work we have, Anatomy of Criticism, 1957. In this, he has talked about the systematic study of genres, symbols, and archetypes. And he also gave us four mythos. In this, comedy, tragedy, romance, and satire we can find. The Educated Imagination, 1963. In this, he has talked about the literature shapes imagination via recurring archetypes. He developed archetypal criticism. He identified universal patterns and myth across cultures, and he also is influential in understanding structural repetition in a text. Okay, so Northrop Frye, you can majorly go with the work Anatomy of Criticism, everybody. Then another writer we have, Jean Frank Lyotard, who was also a French philosopher, cultural theorist. He was a leading figure in postmodern philosophy, particularly in questioning grand narratives and promoting pluralism. The major works are The Postmodern Condition, 1979. He critiques of meta-narratives, that means knowledge is fragmented and contextual. He challenged grand narratives of history, science, and progress. He emphasized pluralism and skepticism, and he highlighted that knowledge is localized and decentralized. Another important critic we have, Frederick Jameson, who was an American and most influential critics of postmodernism. He merges Marxist theory with cultural analysis to explore how literature and art reflect broader social and economic systems. His work helps reader understand postmodern culture as a product of late capitalist society. Very, very important. And he also marked by depthlessness, pastiche, and an erosion of historical consciousness. And the important work by him, Postmodernism or the Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism, 1991. In this, he defined the concept that postmodernism is the dominant culture and the logic of late capitalism. Okay. Postmodernism, he defined the postmodern culture is characterized by pastiche, schizophrenic temporality, and depthlessness. And also, he emphasizes the commodification of culture and the influence of capitalism on the aesthetics. He introduced the idea that postmodern art lacks historical referentiality, unlike modernist art. In the work The Political Unconscious Narrative as a Socially Symbolic Act, 1981, The concept he talked about is that literature should be analyzed as a reflection of social and political structure. Okay, and he argues for the social political unconscious, where all cultural artifacts encode class, struggle, and historical dynamics. He encourages Marxist readings of literature and culture. Okay, the another work, The Antinomies of Realism, 2013. You can cross check the year, everybody. He investigates the tension between realism and modern postmodern aesthetics. He explores how literary forms represent a social reality, and he highlights the shift from realism to postmodern narrative forms. Okay, the key concept by him is very important. Postmodernism as a cultural logic and late capitalism, that means the cultural forms reflects the economic and political structure of a late capitalism. Then in he also talked about the pastiche versus parody. Postmodern works imitate styles without satire, creating a sense of deafness. Schizophrenic temporality, that means there is a loss of historical depth. The present dominates the perception of a time. And in the political unconsciousness, this is very important. He talked about that every cultural product can be read as a manifestation of social and class conflicts. And historicity and ahistoricity, he said, modernism engages with history and postmodernism often detached from it. Postmodernism discarded everything. So that is why he said postmodernism detached from it. Another writer we have, another critic writer, we can include him, Homi K. Bhabha, 1949 and the present time. Homi K. Bhabha was a post-colonial theorist and critic influential in postmodern literary studies. He explored cultural hybridity, mimicry, and colonial discourse. So, the major work, The Location of Culture, 1994, he introduces the concept of hybridity, ambulance, and cultural negotiation. Remember, because of some literary influence, we are studying about him in a literary part, but we will also study him in a literary theorist. Okay, literary theory. The key figure was he examines Homi K. Bhabha examines intersection of power, identity, and culture. Okay, so before ending the class, let's discuss about some minor critics. Everybody, Ihab Hassan we have, who was an Egyptian American literary critic and the pioneer in postmodern literary studies. The major works you will find The Literature of Silence, 1967, and The Towards Postmodernism, 1987. He studied postmodern fiction, fragmentation, and irony, and metafiction by emphasizing that experimentation in narrative and the rejection of traditional literary forms. Okay. Also, another one we have, Robert Scholz, who was an see what it is has written, who was an American literary critic and theorist specialized in narrative theory, metafiction, and experimental literature, and the work The Fabulators, 1967, and Structural Fabulation, 1979. He focused on postmodern narrative techniques, self-reflexive fiction, and the playful, innovative use of storytelling. He emphasized how postmodern novels challenge traditional narrative structures. Okay, then another. So I hope you have understood what I have tried to explain you. I know I'm not that better, but still I have given my best. I hope you have understood. If you have any doubt or any queries, you can simply go to the comment section and share your point of view. Okay. So this is all for today, everybody. We have finished the literary criticism topic, the unit of UGC NET English literature. So thank you so much for joining. Stay tuned with the channel. This is all for today, everybody. How do you like the concept and explanation? If you have any doubt, queries, you can feel free to comment. The next unit we are going to start, I have given the poll and the majority of the students want the literary theorist post World War II. So we will now going to discuss about that unit, and in this October we are going to finish the remaining units because they are less important. The major one we have finished. This was the last major topic that we must focused, the literary criticism. Okay, so do prepare your own notes. Do not forget to do self-study. Do subscribe the channel, share to every and each student who are preparing for whatever English literature exam, because everything is important and appear in each competitive exam. helpful for all the English literature exam and for all the students. Okay. Thank you so much for joining. Take care of yourself, everybody, and bye bye.